And we'll try to understand now how Actifio is offering the protection for standalone systems and the RAC systems and the data guard systems. And we do support, as I explained in the previous webinar, we do support all the versions of the database, like starting from 10G, enterprise and standard editions, and we do support systems like standalone, RAC, and data guard. Okay. In protection process, again, you just need to go to the Actifio desktop and you discover the application. And once you have your application ready on the application manager, and you just need to go to the protection button. Here you can see on the top right hand side, left side, and you can choose the corresponding template and profile. The moment you create a SLA template in the previous slides, it is going to create a template and a profile. So you can choose the corresponding template and profile which you have created, and your database is ready for protection, right? And in advanced settings, and you have a couple more options in the advanced settings as part of your protection. And this is very simple, as I've explained in the previous screen. You just need to select your application in Actifio screen, Actifio GUI, and you select the desired template which you have created as part of your SLA settings, and go to advanced settings, and you can see a couple more advanced settings here. And you have a lot of settings, but let me explain you a few advanced settings as part of your database protection. Once you are protecting the application, and you can choose these application advanced settings, and you enter your database username and password which you are trying to protect, and which you are trying to protect in the sense like which you are trying to take the backup using Actifio, and you just enter username and password, and the role of the database, like the user belongs to a sysdba role, and you have an option to select the role as sysdba here. You can able to see on the right hand side. And Oracle service name, when you are choosing this DB authentication mode by entering the username and password with the DB authentication, and if you remember in the previous webinar, we have explained about the authentication, DB authentication and OS authentication. And if you are choosing a OS authentication, you don't need to enter these username and password and role values. It is not mandatory, because we will connect to your target database server, and we connect to your Oracle user, OS user, and from there we are able to connect to your database. But if you're going with the DB authentication, you can enter the corresponding database username and password, which is having a sysdba role, so that we can use this user to take the backups. And Oracle service name, which is your TNS service name, you can keep that under your TNS names.vara on your DB host, so that when you are connecting to the database using this username and password and using a SQL plus authentication method, for example, SQL plus username / password @TNS entry as is DBA. So we are going to connect in that fashion to your database and take the backups. And same as for RMAN. Well, you're connecting to the RMAN to make the RMAN API calls. We will use this user and make sure that this is a sysdba privileged user, and use that user for taking the RMAN backups as well. And archeolog service name. And if you want to have a RAC environment, and you might be having multiple nodes, right? Say, for example, you have a 2-node cluster, and I want to run my backup always from node 1. So you can have a node 1 service name, TNS entry, enter this in Oracle service name. But I want to run always my archeolog backups from node 2. In that case, you have to give a TNS entry, which is pointing to the node 2 service, right? So that's the reason you can have this archeolog service name and separate your service name for your archeologs, or optional if you're leaving it as a blank, and we will take the primary service name and connect to the database and take the archeolog backups. And allocation unit size as part of ASM, and if you are protecting your database which is running on ASM, and as part of that, if you remember, we capture methods in 2 ways, right? One is if your source database is running on ASM, and we are going to mount our staging disk from our appliance to the database host in the form of ASM disk group. If your source database is running on file system, and we are going to mount our staging disk in the form of file system to our DB host, so that when you are taking the backup to the ASM disk group, or when we are taking backup to the file system, we are going to unmount from your host, and we are going to keep it under appliance. And to create that ASM disk group, to speed up maybe if you want to create with a different allocation unit size, because we are creating ASM disk group, we are mounting disk on your DB host, and we are making it as a ASM disk group as part of backup, and we are taking backup to this ASM disk group. And if you want to create this ASM disk group with a different allocation unit size, and you can choose this allocation unit size. And if you have a multiple Oracle homes, and if you want to take a database backup which belongs to a particular home, and you can specify the particular TNS admin path for the particular database. And optionally, I think you can use even the convert ASM format to file system format, another advanced setting option. And if you are choosing this option, if your database is running on ASM, but still we are going to take the backup as form of file system, so that you can use this file system backup to create a cloned copies on a file system target host. And vice versa feature is also available, convert file system format to ASM format. And the rack member nodes. And this advanced settings, basically you have a 4-node cluster, rack cluster, but I wanted to run backup from only 2 nodes. Then you enter the specific nodes into the rack member nodes advanced settings option, and we are going to run a load balance backup across these 2 nodes. And you have many more settings. I'm just trying to cover a few settings, few important settings here. Though once you are done with your screen, all these settings were done, and now you save the changes. Now you are ready with your production, right? Once you are ready with your production, you can able to see this screen. It is going to change from a red color to a blue drum symbol and a database symbol. You can able to see now you are ready to run the backups using Actifio. Now try to understand what kind of protections we are offering from Actifio. And standalone, as the name suggests, I think standalone database runs on maybe a standalone node or kind of a single node, right? So make sure that we met all the prerequisites as I've explained earlier. So database should be up and running, and optionally you should enable BCT and make an entry in etc Vora tab. And once you are done with all this, you make sure that your database is running on archeolog mode. Once you have a basic prerequisites and you are under Actifio protection, and as I explained in the previous 2 slides, you just need to open that application manager in Actifio GUI and select your application and select the template and select the application advanced settings and save. So now your database is ready for protection, and based on your SLA schedule, it is going to start running the backups. And if you see in the standalone, and you will have an Actifio, and we will discover your database and discover your database application. And once you start entering the SLA, and once you're ready with the protection settings, and your database is ready. And this is a kind of a diagram, I think, which represents kind of a Actifio appliance and your source DB host. When it comes to the rack, so let me explain how we are actually protecting under rack. And imagine that you have a 2-node cluster, which is a node 1 and node 2, and here it is Actifio. And if you want to run the backup across the nodes, so that instead of running against a single node, the backup might be a bit slower. And instead, if you are actually spreading the load between the 2 nodes, right, your backup may be much faster, and you can complete your backups in a little earlier. And to run that, and you remember when I am explaining the advanced settings, we have Oracle service name, which is a TNS entry service name, which you are going to use to connect to the database, right? And you can create a service using SRVCTL method and use that service across the nodes, right? When you are creating service, you can create service for these 2 instance 1 and instance 2, which is nothing but you're going to create a service which can use to connect to the database. If you're using that service to connecting to the rack databases, and it can connect to node 1 or it can connect to the node 2 instance. And use that service name, and make sure that you keep that service name as a TNS entry in node 1 and node 2, and you start protection using Actifio. And there is one more advanced settings. If you remember rack member nodes, you add these 2 IPs in the rack member nodes in the advanced setting, and just save the changes. That's it. So the subsequent backups, it is going to land the connections. And if you're opening the channels are going to land onto both node 1 and node 2, so that you are load balancing your backup across the nodes. And optionally, if you want, you can even choose the node 1 to connect to the data, only connecting to the node 1 and run your backups. But to speed up the backups, to do the load balance backups across the nodes, and you create a service using SRVCTL and use that service name in your TNS. And once you are running the database backups using Actifio, using the corresponding service, it is going to open the sessions against node 1 and node 2 and the backups. And coming to the data guard, so we do also protect from the data guard. If you're having a physical standby database and which is in a read-only mode, and we are, or maybe it is in a mount mode, so we are capable to run the backups even from the physical standby mode. But we always, I think the reason I think we are performing some couple of commands actually as a prerequisites on the database, basic select commands to see everything is fine or not, so that we always suggest to put the database physical standby in a read-only mode using an active data guard, so that when we are running, you can always take the backup, like how you are protecting your primary, and you can the same way, or how you are protecting your standalone database, and in the same way you can protect your standby database as well, physical standby database as well. But as part of backup, we make sure that we perform a switch by connecting to the primary, so that all the changes are getting transferred to the standby environment, and we make sure that before we kick off a RMAN API calls on the standby, we are going to connect to the primary and make a switch. This is a traditional best practice, and this how it works in the data guard. And if you have, again, the data guard, if you have multiple nodes, and if you want to load balance on the data guard multiple nodes, as explained in the previous rack protection slides, you can have a service created between the nodes on the standby side, and you can maintain the service name and use that service name when you are taking the backup from the physical standby. I think now we understand Actifio supports the standalone systems, whether it is a standalone file system or standalone ASM and data guard and rack. And I think the another beautiful feature, Actifio is also supporting the TAF, which is a transparent failover of Actifio RMAN backup. Say, for example, you have a 2-node cluster and you've decided to run always Actifio backup from node 1. But for any reason, if node 1 is down, and Actifio is capable to do a failover to the node 2 and continue the backup. And there is a settings in advanced settings, you can able to see that failover node choice advanced setting option, and using that you can able to, when you're protecting a node 1 and when you're running a backup, and if there is a issue and node 1 is down for some reason when you're starting backup, and it is going to fail over to the node 2 and continue the backup. In the next slide, you can able to see the corresponding advanced setting option. And here is the option we provide in the application advanced settings. And if you remember the advanced settings which I showed you as part of protection process, like username, password, role, Oracle service name, in the same screen you can have this failover choice, node IP, and service name. And you can have this failover choice IP, node IP, to which node you wanted to failover, and you can just save the changes. So whenever a situation comes, and we automatically failover to the node 2 and continue the backup. And now we know that Actifio is supporting various production methods, and we do support standalone, rack, data guard, and even we do support a failover scenario as well. So eventually, if one node down, we are not stopping or we are not failing the backups, and eventually we do a TAF transparent application failover to the corresponding node based on your advanced setting option, and we continue the backups.
Thank you for joining us for another YouTube Tech Tip video. If you like the content you're seeing on this channel, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you will be alerted to any future content.